Hi everyone, this is Matt Gang. We're with the Sophos Managed Threat Response Team, also known as the MTR Operations Team. We are a team dedicated to providing real-time response, threat hunting, and investigations for our Sophos customers. We're going to go through an attack scenario that we put together using an open source tool called Caldera. And what this is going to allow us to do is go through a few different phases of what a typical attack lifecycle looks like. It's going to allow us to show off some of the MTR console and how our operators use the tools that we have available to us. And it's also going to allow you to start getting into the mind of how our analysts think and the processes that they go through as they're going through an investigation and after they've kind of initially received that first alert and what they do next. All right, so let's take a look on how we get this to progress. So if we look up here, we have an operation. We have the information already filled out, so we'll go ahead and kick this off. And this will then spawn the particular operation that we set up down here out onto our endpoint who's going to receive all of these commands. So as we can see, it's already started initiating some of the activities. So we're identifying local users and active users, and all of these commands are being executed. As these happen, the responses and things will be happening in real time. And as you can see, this information will get collected and brought back, and we can see it here. On the MTR side, we then can see this information as it's coming in or as it's being collected. And we know that the MTR solution is built on OS query. So how these things are collected is through a series of scheduled queries. So if we go take a look real quick at those, we have a number of different query packs that the MTR team has put together, all to collect certain pieces of information that we find relevant about an endpoint, and secondly, to create detections off of some of that information. So what we're going to be looking for here is process events. So this is looking at process spawn events that are logged by our event journals from the EDR product. And this query gets executed every 20 seconds and pulls that data back to our MTR console for our analysts to review. So let's hop back over to see if there's any new data collected. So we'll head back over to search, look for our host name that we were dealing with, which was called demo PC. We'll add that in, change our time frame to be a little more recent. And do a search. And even now we can see that there's some additional data that has come back from this. But more importantly, on the MTR team, rather than looking through raw data, which is very useful for us, in particular when we're doing threat hunting or performing an investigation, we operate mainly off of cases, and cases are programmatic in most cases, built off of that raw data and the detections that we create from them. So we can see from this one, it was generated based on a PowerShell detection, and we'll hop into this one in a second. But this is kind of the view that our analysts will then get presented with as they're going through and doing their analysis. Now, I won't go through and fill out this in its entirety. I wanted to use this more of just a way for you to see kind of behind the curtains as to how these things propagate and get put in front of our analysts for analysis. So we'll hop on over to this particular threat or this detection, and we can see straight away that from the command prompt, we're dealing with some encoded PowerShell. So as an analyst, I may take this over and pop it into a different tool. CyberChef is a common utility for us to use, and I might want to then remove some null bytes there, and I can see now that what this particular PowerShell command was doing was trying to download a file from a particular host on the network, being this. And we know this is a lab environment. So we have our real first indicator that we would consider on the MTR team, that being a detection. And now some dodgy PowerShell. Of course, encoded PowerShell doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but given the nature of what's happening here, it does look like something that we should investigate. So in our process, being our investigative framework, we go through what we call an OODA loop. So that's observe, orient, decide, act. And from, I guess, my initial point of view, this is kind of my initial observation and orientation phase. I'm taking kind of data out or data that I'm getting, and then I'm going in and reviewing and investigating some of that in more detail. So let's hop back over to the actual threat that we were presented with and see if there's any other interesting information that might be here. And the other thing that's kind of popping out to me is it might be another kind of just orientation phase, is this parent process name. So this is WMI Priv SE, which means it's the WMI provider on the actual host we're looking at is the parent that launched this particular PowerShell command. This is odd in itself because this is, of course, a simulation, and we know it is a common pattern for people and adversaries to do. But this would kind of probably be my next major place that I would look to go see what this may be doing. So we can do that a couple of different ways. If we head back over to the search interface, I'm just going to refresh this here real quick, and we can do a couple of different things. We know the time based on the case was around whatever this was generated at, 3:47 my time. So we can look around there to see, what other information potentially was happening around that point in time. But nonetheless, we can see a lot of the activity here. So if we want to, say, look for the PowerShell commands, we can see all of those here. We can filter for that and get it. If we want to then see what potentially was happening through WMI, we can look here to see if there was anything additional. So we can see other things here, calling or using the phrase WMI in there. We can see detection here was generated off of this event. And we can also see some additional details here where we have this other kind of PS1 script. If we wanted to, we could go take a look at that. So let's try to do that. And this would be something that we would do as part of our investigation, where if we do uncover some sort of indicator and we want to learn more about it, we do have the ability to execute response actions. One of those response actions is pulling a file. So if we add this here, and then we're looking for our demo PC, the one we're working on, we'll see if we can initiate this and pull this file back to see if it allows us to learn anything new. So this might take a few seconds. So basically what's happening is the host or the portal is pushed out a command to this endpoint to retrieve this file for us so we can perform an additional analysis. That could be a human or an analyst actually reviewing and looking at this, or it could be a submission over to the Sophos Labs analysis and sandboxing engine, which we have integrations built in to the platform. So we will kind of come back to this in a second as that completes. But more importantly, let's jump into, if we kind of go back to the detection that we were looking at. Here we have we kind of pointed in on this WMI command here and what it was doing. Another thing that we could do is pivot into this host. So if we wanted to go look specifically for information related to this device, we could see all of the detections, and it's leading up to being suspicious. So as we know, in Caldera, we did a bunch of recon activity, then we initiated some PowerShell and other items, and we can see all of that here. So we can, if we wanted to jump in, we can see the who am I and what command they were executed it with, and what's a parent of that being command.exe. We can go back and see some of the other items on this particular device being GP result. So what domain policies apply to me, and other things. So we have all this context here. Each of them is going to be a data point that our analysts can use as part of their investigation. But let's go see what we can find based on the WMI, and that's going to actually require us to go perform a live query. Data that we collect is selective, so for instance, we may not pull back everything all the time to the platform, but what we do have the ability to do is go initiate a live query out to those devices for data or supplemental information that we may need. So I believe I have a query here that will allow us to start seeing what potentially is the matter. So there's kind of three things when it comes to WMI. There's filters, consumers, and bindings. Each one of them does a different mechanism where the binding kind of pulls them together in a sense to actually make them execute. So if we let's go ahead and run this, so it'll queue up this particular search. So what this is doing now is we take this very simple command. This is not complex at all. These tables are nicely built out for us in OS Query. But what we want to do is we want to know if there's anything new. There's some standard tables in WMI that we always know exist, but it's also very uncommon really for new things to exist in WMI unless that environment uses it heavily, which is not often the case. So what this does is it takes this query, positions it to be executed out on the endpoint, and then that endpoint will pick up that query and then return results. So as we can see, we have results here, and lo and behold, think back to what that case actually generated the detection from. We can see here that it was this particular detection. So starting to piece things back together where we might not know from our initial detection kind of where it happened, but based on the details that we were able to get as we were going through our investigation, going through our process, we can then kind of step backwards in time based on some of that details and figure out where this was coming from. So the next step that our analysts would take, so we've kind of established that this piece is what we would consider a persistence mechanism. So this is going to kick off every time the filter is established. So if we want to go look at that, we can. I don't know that it's necessary. We just know that this exists now, which is inherently not good based on the command that it's passed. So let's jump back over and see if this file, it was successful. So what I can do now is I can download this. I'm not going to do that. What will be more interesting is to see we can now take this persistence or this PS1 script. We have a SHA, and we can submit this over to SLAP for analysis. So we'll go ahead and do that, kind of let this hang out and do its thing. What would happen next in this particular case is we've uncovered a detection that we believe is bad. We went through and performed some investigation based on data that was in our real-time search feature. We saw all of the reconnaissance commands. We saw WMI being the parent of this. We then went and live queried for some of this data from the actual endpoint, and we found where this was coming from, and just based on history, and we know this to be common. The next phase of what our analysts are going to do and kind of going through our process would be trying to figure out how we get to the final phase of our OODA loop, and that's going to be act. So we want to do something about this. Doing something about it's going to be dependent on, from our standpoint, what the customer has opted into in terms of their response mode. So if you recall, there's notify, where we'll just send them a notification. We would package up all of this intelligence that we just gathered through this case and send it over to them. There's collaborate, where we would package that detail, and then the customer could authorize us to take actions for them if they wanted, or they can handle them based on our prescriptive guidance. Or there's authorize mode. So we'll go ahead and just assume that this customer in our lab is in authorize mode. And what we would do next is we would go into our response mode live terminal. And what this is going to do, since we don't have any pre-built actions to disable or remove WMI filters, consumers, and bindings, is we would open up an actual terminal to this particular host. which is going to give us a virtual shell into that device once it connects, and we will be able to interrogate it and run particular actions. So now that we have a shell established to our PC, we're going to do a couple of things. We're just going to cd out to our root directory just so we're there. And then we can do a number of things. We can continue to perform our investigation if we wanted to. So that could be maybe we want to verify that those consumers, filters, and bindings are still there. But we did that through our live query, so we're still pretty confident that they're there. I've kind of prepared these commands in preparation of this. So basically what would then happen next is our analysts or whoever is working this case, based on the items that they saw, so they would go through, look for consumers, filters, and bindings. They would then have to issue out a command to remove each one of those. Those are going to look something like this. So here we have we're looking at WMI, the event filtering for the particular attributes that we discovered. So we often find it easier to just where we encode our own commands, because then we don't have to worry about any of that. So basically what we get back is a remove WMI object for the subscription event filter. And then we would have to go through this in two other fashions and delete the other two things. So this one would then delete the consumer pattern, so we get confirmation back that we're removing the consumer from there. And then finally, we would take the last piece and issue this PowerShell command to remove the filter binding, which is tying those two things together. So how would we go about validating from our perspective on the MTR team? This is effectively threat neutralized. If we were considering it from that perspective, we got the case, we got the detection, we observed where it was coming from, that being WMI, and we went and removed those WMI entries to prevent that from continuing to try to spawn. So we could go back on our side, back to live query for this particular host. Again, we're going to go find our query 2, which we had prepared for this. And if you recall previously, it came back with a DCOM launcher, and this was the command line template that was being executed. So if we try to rerun this, click rerun, should queue up this query one last time. This varies depending on the query, depending on the host, where we're at in the different cycle, but it's usually pretty quick. And results back, and now we have a count of 0. So again, we had results, we had kind of our persistence mechanism here. We use live terminal through the MTR product to go remove that persistence mechanism, and now we have that completed. So kind of where we would go from here is this customer, we're assuming that they were in authorized mode. So our team would then take all of the information that we analyzed, that being all of the event data that we discovered, the WMI data that we discovered. We would package this up along with then the response actions that we took since we were in authorized mode. We'd package that out to the customer, send them, and let them know everything that we did in a nice, neat little package. If we go back real quick to the Caldera piece, if we wanted to go through and validate that we did collect all this information, we could. But I think, as you can imagine from earlier, we saw a lot of reconnaissance activity for local users, directory and domain information. And then finally, here's kind of that WMI custom. So if we do want to look here, what we can observe is we have an event filter DCOM launcher written, an event consumer DCOM launcher written, and a filter binding also written. These were the names of the items that we removed from the initial host. So, and if you recall, this is the command that we were looking at earlier. So all in all, after all of the kind of behaviors or the adversary behaviors that were used within this profile, we've now successfully gotten to the root of what was the issue, that being these WMI bindings, and we have then resolved neutralized those particular commands from executing again. So hopefully this is a quick but good glimpse behind the scenes as to how the MTR team will handle an investigation. This is just a single use case, that being a PowerShell detection. There's many other different and various detections that we would go through through the course of the MTR system, or I guess just in daily ops in general. But I feel like this gives a pretty good use case. One being we kind of know everything that has happened based on this profile, and two, we can kind of pair that up with the data that we're seeing on the MTR platform. So thanks for listening in. Hopefully you found this valuable. Again, my name is Matt Gangwer, and I'm a member of the MTR team. Thanks for listening.